So you run into a small army of enemies in a nightmare dungeon 17 levels above you. You press Unstable Currents, and in the 10 seconds it lasts, the cooldown's gone down by 25 seconds? And then in the next 5 seconds, it's now ready to be used again? Well, that's not bad. That's not bad at all, is it? Let's do this thing. Hello, my fellow sorcerers, one and all. I bid you welcome and hello. Grab a chair, get comfortable, because today I'm going to go over my upgraded, latest and greatest take on my personal favorite current sorcerer build, Arc Lash. And last time we had a little bit of a changeover with a mind to have Unstable Currents up as often as possible, but there was still a few little pockets where it wasn't there. Well, I've gone back to the drawing board, and after a lot of experimenting, we are now approaching true 80 to 90% uptime across a dungeon. But more than that, we're also, I mean, you're watching it happen. Look how often I am pressing Flame Shield, Ice Armor, Teleport, and Frost Nova. I am just churning through my cooldowns endlessly, which not only, makes the build way more effective, it makes you nigh unkillable because you're permanently popping defensives every second. This feels kind of like a cheat code, and the speed and pace at which you can just blow through nightmare dungeons way above you is as fun as it is impressive. And damn, is it fun. So, what are we actually doing? What changes and twists have we made to the core of this playstyle? Well, let's go over it, starting with, as always, the skill tree. Start then with the shocking twist that is maxing Arc Lash as our bread and butter spamming only offensive ability that we cast, getting it with the usual enhanced and glinting so we can start working on our cooldown reduction. 1 rank of Firebolt to power the Firebolt enchantment that we still use, as Burning Synergy is just too powerful to ignore in essentially any sorcerer build. Then we look at the core skills and just go, no, as we move down to defensives and, as usual, grab all of them. The Flame Shield with the enhanced and the shimmering for that sweet immune, and the heal will also be getting a new aspect on our legendaries to do with Flame Shield that really enhances this setup as well, so it really is doubly important. The teleport, of course, with the Raiment of the Infinite, is the single most powerful thing sorcerers can do, just generally speaking, and then the shimmering and enhanced to use it more often and to not die after jumping into a pack of elites. Then we grab all ranks of Glass Cannon. We are using our cooldowns constantly here, which means we are so hard to kill, we can afford to get the free damage bump that this is, and then we get our Elemental Attunement, so we are resetting these defensives even more, which plays into the new synergy that we're working here. We get Ice Armor, but we don't need any upgrades to it, so we just get it for the extra tankiness and the extra cooldown to press to power our barrier and cooldown synergies, and then of course Frost Nova to give us access to vulnerability, because not having vulnerability is essentially a death sentence to any given effective build, as sad as that, to be fair, is. Then we move down to the new star of the show, as you can see. Ice Blades. See, Ice Blades and the build that they enabled was one of my favorite things way back in the beta before they nerfed it into oblivion. But I've been experimenting with it, and as you've seen, I have very much found a way to incorporate it into the Arc Lash playstyle to give you near infinite Unstable Currents uptime. How do I do that? Well, we'll be bouncing up and down the tree to explain it, but for now we get 1 point in it just so we can get the enchantment, as it is our new second enchantment slot. Grab enhanced, though it's simply just so we can get to summoned, so the cooldown reduction gets applied to our other skills. And you see now where this is going. We also grab our lucky hits, as we do want a good amount of lucky hit for this build to put fuel in the other engine that we'll be playing with. Then then we have aligned the elements just to get to protection for that sweet barriering up whenever we press one of our defensive skills. Then we still take Conjuration Mastery, which now is even better, because we'll have so many Ice Blades out on top of these mass amount of lightning spears we'll summon during Unstable Currents. This is going to be powering you to 20-30% extra damage on top, and this is just pure bonus, and you really feel it. It's such a good pickup here. Then we go down here and grab Inner Flames to get to Devouring Blaze to get that 40% increased critical strike damage, which is a meaty increase. Then we grab just Static Discharge, so our lucky hits will put down Crackling Energy for us to pick up. We'll get to why in a moment. Then we grab Unstable Currents, which is our bread and butter, the attack speed, which is glorious, and then the Crackling Energy pulses while it is up, which is also very important. We also get Coursing Currents for the extra crit chance, we get Electrocution to keep alive, and then we get Conduction to get that 9% movement speed as we crit away with shock skills. This is basically always up, and it will make you clear a lot faster because you're running a lot faster, but what's more, because we use the unique boots that convert movement speed to crit, this is worth another like 2.5% crit to us, which is really nice. Then we grab Overflowing Energy so that our Crackling Energy pulses will reduce the cooldown of both Unstable Currents and Teleport as it strikes enemies. This is being powered by this. In the last iteration, we had Ball Lightning as our enchantment effect, so they were being summoned to the spot. Then we grabbed Wizards so that they were summoning Crackling Energy, and that kept us fueled. But the damage that it did wasn't actually that good. So that's why I wanted to see if we could do this in some sort of a better way that still keeps the cooldown reduction from Overflowing Energy to use Unstable Currents as much as possible. So we get this Static Discharge, we stack a bit of lucky hit, and then this gives us enough Crackling Energy so that this is constantly happening to power Unstable Currents cooldown, and then on top of that, we can then move into the Ice Blades to get that reducing the cooldown of not just Unstable Currents, but all of your cooldowns as well, which we want to be pressing as often as possible because all of them are incredibly effective. On top of that, it gives us an extra source of vulnerable, and this build stacks vulnerable damage as most builds do, and that's really useful to have. It gives us another way of getting it without Frost Nova. It also, as I said, powers Conjuration Mastery, and you'll notice that Ice Blades has a 92% lucky hit chance, which basically means when Ice Blade hits, it just rolls the 15% or whatever lucky hit chance is on your lucky hit to make it happen. So your Ice Blades are constantly summoning Crackling Energy too, that then again powers Overflowing Energy. So you see how this is kind of a glorious feedback loop of everything is reducing everything's cooldown, which is then causing everything's cooldown to reduce, and so on and so forth endlessly. It feels so fun, fast, and satisfying to play. So to look at our enchantments, Firebolt, the near mandatory one for our Burning Paragon board and Devouring Blaze synergy, but then our new boy in Ice Blades to get that cooldown reduction, vulnerable, and all of that loveliness that comes with having an army of Ice Blades around you. And the thing is, we are constantly using cooldowns. We're constantly Frost Novering, constantly Ice Shielding, constantly Teleporting, constantly Flame Shield, constantly Frost Novering, constantly Unstable Currenting, and we just churn through it. And because everything is reducing cooldowns constantly, the Crackling Energy for our Teleport and Unstable Currents, the Ice Blades reducing the cooldown on Frost Nova, Ice Armor, and Flame Shield, the Arc Lash Glinting reducing the cooldown on all 6 at once, everything just comes together to let you just spam your defensives. And that essentially becomes the new playstyle of this build. You just fly through the dungeon, pressing everything as soon as it comes off cooldown, because that's just the effective way to do it. Obviously, a few things need timing. Don't Frost Nova nobody. Don't use a Flame Shield when you're at full health and fine and you're not fighting any enemies. But generally speaking, you can operate this on a, if you can press it press it mentality, which might be a little bit unga bunga me do lightning, but it just works. It scratches a very much enjoyable itch as you watch it play out, and you just feel unstoppable. So, let's look at the gear side of things. For our decorations, we want critical strike to vulnerable enemies in our weaponry, and then we want the rubies in our armor for the extra life. Extra life means bigger barriers, means longer barriers, means more barrier synergy, and then we want the skulls on our jewelry to get the extra armor, so we're not just dying from being in melee all the time, though even then with the amount of barriers we have, that's not a huge problem, but there still isn't really a better option. Aspect-wise, on our weapon, we want more vulnerable damage while we have a barrier. This is just a big power increase. We wear our Esu's Heirloom to convert movement speed into crit chance, which is why we take the movement speed passive on the skill tree, and this is just really good for getting places quickly when you're farming dungeons. Then we finally drop Ice Heart Brias on the legs, which does sadden me because I love it, but the armor gain here is just too useful, and the defensive boost that we get really plays into this almost mindless just spam all your abilities and ignore what the enemy is doing, and you really do feel the gain from having this. Then we have our other next new aspect in Flame Shield. Lets you move through enemies and then it will immobilize them when you do. This is so good, and the reason that it is so good is Devouring Blaze. If they are also immobilized, this bonus is increased to 100%. You do double damage to enemies that you pass through with Flame Shield. And because we are constantly flame shielding from all the cooldown reduction, this means that we are massively amping our damage output. You get a group of elites, you Raiment of the Infinite, which of course we still want, them together on top of each other. Now every enemy is stacked on you, you just hit the flame shield and you don't even have to move. You've now immobilized them all because Raiment has pulled them on you, and now you start slashing for double crit damage on top of your other crit boosts. That is just glorious, it really is, and you really notice it. Helmet-wise, we still want our 2 charges of Frost Nova. It gives more cooldown to summon more Ice Blades, it's more vulnerable, and it just makes everything feel so much nicer to have access to. The more Frost Novas, the better, in pretty much every Sorcerer build. Then, on our necklace specifically, you want Aspect of Control, and the reason for this is this stacks. If an enemy is immobilized, stunned, and frozen, well then it's 51% for each, which is why it's such a good aspect for any build that can apply all of these. So we want as much damage out of it as we can get. Then we move on to just more damage in general while having a barrier. We're going to have a barrier constantly because of all the cooldown reduction, so this is just a nice increase. I really did wish I had a higher roll on this. Then we get the basic skill attack speed for our Arc Lashing Arc Lash here. That is one of the key aspects here, and that remains the same. And then finally we have doing more % damage to stunned enemies with the chance to stun distant ones. This is obviously a huge spike when we Raiment, stack, and stun. So that's how the aspects are breaking down. Then we want to look at the actual stat rolls on the gear and what you're looking for. Very simple priority order once more. Cooldown reduction is at the very top, then ranks of Devouring Blaze, then ranks of defensive skills, then lucky hit chance, either pure or while having a barrier, then attack speed, either pure or with basic attacks, then crit chance is very, very good. Following that then is crit damage, vulnerable damage, lightning crit damage, and then int or other generic damage increasing skills like damage to close enemies or damage to stunned enemies, and then you will be good to go. Now to do Paragon before I am Paragon, and the video's over. I'm so sorry. We have the basic board as usual, generally just mirror my route as we go through it, but now we have the exploit glyph in the base here for that extra vulnerable damage increase. Vulnerable damage is everything, and even with just Frost Nova, this is amazing. Now Ice Blades is giving us even more vulnerable damage. It really is just perfect. Then we move up and we want to grab the Burning Instinct board for that sweet Firebolt enchantment synergy. We grab the cluster up here for the extra damage to burning enemies. We grab the Smoldering Embers and the Cinders and everything around it rare node wise that isn't just pure stats unless you have to. Then we have Territorial, extra damage to close enemies. We're always close to what we're damaging because Arc Lash is essentially melee, and then the damage reduction is really nice to stay alive too. Activate it with the Dex, and then you are good to move on out into the next board, which is the Frigid Fate board. Now, I would eventually get to this legendary passive if I had the spare points, but it is not a priority for now. However, if you are much higher level than me and do have the spare points once everything else is done, do grab it for even more of those lucky hits rolling as Ice Blades hits vulnerable enemies, which is called damage, and it's just a nice little bump on top. In any case, we immediately head down to grab the vulnerable damage and all of the magic vulnerable near it, and then up to the glyph slot. We get the weakness, and then we grab the chilling, mainly for the plus intelligence that it gives, but this weakness here is such a huge damage spike for the build because we power it with this extra percent tactician, 95% bonus, which adds a lot to our damage output. Sadly, the dexterity requirement to get the 10% damage to barriers is much harder to come by, so that kind of has to just sit there, but it's still very much worth it to amp the weakness node. Then we head down here, and this is where things get a little bit different. We get the Enchantment Master, and this makes our enchantments 20% stronger. You want to head straight for it with this orientation so you can get to it quickly. This means that instead of every 40 seconds of cooldowns we spawn in Ice Blades, it's every 33. That is a huge gain, and it makes a real difference playing this style of Arc Lash. Then we move on down, we grab this just because we might as well, though it's not super important, and we eventually end up at just a pure plus 20% damage increase, which is obviously very, very lovely. Then I will go over here, get to the glyph. We have even more plus percent non-physical damage, which is a nice little gain, and in this glyph we place Conjurer, so our lightning spears in Unstable Currents and our Ice Blades do more damage, but that's not really the main gain. The main gain is that they last 20% longer, which means even more time to reduce even more cooldowns with Ice Blades. It's not important enough to get before the 3 glyphs I've mentioned, but it is a really nice cherry on top once you have the space to do so. Once you have that in there and everything online, we move down here and you will be getting the Crackling Energy board so that our Crackling Energy lasts even longer and again powers more cooldown reduction for every little bit of Crackling Energy you pick up, which is very, very nice. And with that all said and done then, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have found this an enjoyable take on Arc Lash. Is it strictly better than playing the ball lightning side of things? I'm finding it to be so, but for more than anything, I want to present it as an alternate playstyle that lets you just really rip through nightmare dungeons at such a speed while just pressing everything all of the time, and it's that real pace that I really want to stress because this build has it in spades. It really, really does. There is an eventual scenario where you end up at level 100 and you have so much lucky hit that you can do something insane like drop the Firebolt enchantment for Meteor as your lucky hit source of burning damage, or even more immobilized, but in practice it just doesn't happen enough and often enough to be worth it right now. But who knows, as gear gets even stronger or you find literally perfect rolls on every slot. But of course I will keep evolving, trying new things and coming back to you with more and more sorcerer builds. I am very excited about the one that I will be putting together after this. For now though, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below. And until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.